Three, two, one, and welcome to the first episode of Celestial Cafe. For those of you wondering, go ahead and give a personal intro. My name is Luis.
My name is Flavio.
My name is Abraham.
And our intention here is just to create a podcast in which we talk about our general interests, which span across a wide variety of topics: philosophy, religion, psychology. So we're going to cover it all here. Now, to start off, we should probably tell you a little bit about ourselves. One thing that all three of us have in common is that we're part of a self-help group. You want to tell us a little bit more about that, Abe?
Yeah, it's a self-help recovery group based off of the 36 principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, we are not Alcoholics Anonymous, but we do work specifically with the fourth and fifth step from the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We literally make a searching and fearless moral inventory, and then we admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being.
You want to add anything, Flav?
No, I think he pretty much summarized it pretty well.
Oh, dope. So, in this first episode, one of the things that we want to talk about is God, especially in the way that Alcoholics Anonymous talks about God. It's the centermost part of the steps, especially as you start getting even into step 2 and especially step 3. Obviously, God nowadays seems like a much more controversial topic. It seems like we have a very vocal minority of people who are claiming to be atheists and speaking out about how wrong it is to believe in God. So might as well just start diving into it. First thing, we should probably talk about creationism. Let's go ahead and start there.
You want to define creationism?
Indeed. Creationism is the idea that God himself created the earth. He ordained the earth to happen in a very specific way, as seen in the first chapter of Genesis. The earth was created in 7 days, and as such, it's believed God said, "Let there be light," and as such, there was light.
And before this, you said you didn't agree with that, right? You want to elaborate a little?
Actually, yeah. 7 days of creation.
7
Day
days.
1, there was light. Day 2 was the atmosphere. Day 3 was the dry ground and the plants. Day 4 was the sun, the moon, and the stars. Day 5 were the birds and the sea creatures. Day 6 were land animals and humans. And day 7 was the Sabbath of rest. The reason why I personally don't agree with the idea of creationism is because on a scientific basis, it's completely bollocks, the idea that Earth was created in just 7 days. It didn't happen that way. Also, the idea that, well, in order to put creationism into context, you have to put the rest of the Bible into context. In order for Earth to happen the way that the Bible wants us to know that it happened, Earth can't be more than like 7,000 years old. But based off of our archaeological findings and our further interest in the human species, where we came from, how we evolved, and all that sort of stuff that we can get into later, we know that Earth is a lot older than 7,000 years. As such, the idea that these 7 days happened when the Bible says that they happened just seems completely bollocks to me.
Bollocks.
Okay, so your argument is scientific.
Definitely.
I feel like the most part, the Bible is kind of like symbolic, no? That's how I've understood the Bible. I would agree with you. I don't agree with like everything that it says about creationism and how we were born or like how we were created. But I feel like if we really tried, we could definitely find something that these days kind of like symbolize. Because I remember I had watched this movie one time where like it was talking about how like the first day, "Let there be light," was kind of like the Big Bang theory, and how like the days just kind of summarize how science has been able to more or less say how we've started, I guess.
I think that this is where I can start throwing a few like controversies at you, just for all three of us to discuss. For example, as Flav was saying right now about the whole Bible being symbolic, you also want to look at it from the perspective that the Bible was written by mankind, regardless of it being symbolic or, however you want to see the Bible. It was written by man, and so over the years, thousands and thousands of years, it was mankind who began to claim that this was the word of God. So yeah, just a point of view to look at, whether it's actually like, where do you see God? That's the question.
No, yeah, definitely. And I mean, I will say that the idea behind the Bible is that It's a religious text because we believe it is the inspired word of God. We believe that the idea of God makes it possible for a man to perfectly write a book because God allowed it to happen, right? Now, am I 100% sold on this? Not entirely. And I definitely believe that not all of the Bible is literal, especially once you start reading books like Revelation, which talk in very, very grand schemes. There's a chapter in Revelation that talks about a dragon. I still believe dragons to be mystical creatures. I don't believe that they're real. As such, I don't believe that the Bible is trying to make this a real story or saying that this actually happened. I believe that while there are historical events and historical accounts written within the Bible, especially as seen in the Gospels, for a good chunk of it, we can definitely see these as parables. Jordan B. Peterson himself quotes the Bible quite often in his text, in his literature, and he quotes them as parables. He allows people to see what the message behind these stories are.
Wait, I had thought that the Revelations was kind of like the theory of like what was going to happen, or not even a theory. It was just like God saying like that's what's gonna happen at the end of the days or some shit like that.
So it's not gonna be like you're saying that it's not gonna be like on some 2012 type shit, right?
No, not at all. I mean, a lot of those movies and books that talk about the end of the world take a lot of inspiration from the book of Revelation, right? They take a look at the things that happen when the angels come down and command these things. Well, not the angels themselves commanding, but the angels doing the commandments of God. I'm going to be real with you. It's been a little while since I read Revelations, so my memory is a little bit foggy, but I do remember seeing all these visions, all these scenarios about, what Revelation says will happen. But the context of Revelation is that it's actually written by John at the very end of his life. John is being persecuted at this point. He's very, very old, like a very, very old man. And this all came to him as a vision. So he had a vision of Jesus coming down to him in the same way that we saw him on the Mount of Transfiguration, the Mount of Olives, earlier in the Gospels. And so the idea is that Jesus himself, in his greater glory, this is already after his crucifixion, mind you, comes down to John, who is currently in jail, and gives him the vision of what's going to happen at the end of the world so that he can go ahead and write it to the people. And so the idea is that. Now, if you ask me, I personally think John was on drugs when he wrote this. Like, I am being 100% serious. I think John was on drugs when he wrote this.
Because, off the shits.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, he very much had a vision, right? And so what I think that sounds very similar to is that of an acid trip. I think John was quite literally on an acid trip. Maybe not quite acid, but something very similar. And he was having these hallucinations, especially because, mind you, he's in jail, so he's not being fed very well. He's not sleeping very well. And he's also very, very old. So the possibility of this all being hallucination is very, very real. Now, mind you, I think there's still a lot to gain from the book of Revelation. But the purpose for me talking about Revelation here is that I think Revelation shows us that the entirety of the Bible shouldn't be taken quite literally. And there's a lot of it that are just parables.
And you're adding a lot of like logical reasoning into it, and I definitely never saw it from that perspective, like that way, like like his age and his condition and everything. So I have a question though. So what would happen at the end of the world? You mentioned the end of the world, right? And regardless of how it would happen or how it's going to happen or whatnot, what happens after? What comes after the end of the world?
Well, so the idea is that Revelation shows us that God will go ahead and destroy the earth as we know it to restore the earth, create a new heaven and a new earth. Because the idea is that God wants us to live with him indefinitely, like for eternity. And in order to know why that has to happen, you have to fall into this belief that God exists in heaven and we are separate from God and from heaven because we are not perfect. And in order to be joined to God, we have to find that perfection. And Christianity claims that the only way that we can be made perfect and righteous is through Jesus Christ. So by allowing us to give our lives to Jesus Christ, we are then made righteous, we are sanctified, and we are going to be able to join him when he creates a new heaven and new earth. And so anyone who doesn't believe is going to go to hell.
Okay, so the hell does come in. Okay, there is a hell. All right, let's see what you're saying.
Is that like the actual biblical name? I don't think they ever give it a name, do they? They kind of just say like the eternal fires or some
They
shit.
say
They just kind of
Lewis's
describe
house.
it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
God damn.
No, but I mean they do mention the word hell, but it does describe it as like the lake of fire and a lot of this other stuff. Essentially, we're not given a very clear picture about what hell looks like. For example, I actually subscribe a lot more to the idea of what Dante's Inferno paints hell to look like. I think it's a very, very cold place because if you think about it, the idea is that hell is the most distant you can possibly get from God. The only way for that to happen is if God is what brings you light, if God is what brings you joy, if God is what brings like warmth, then I think the complete opposite of that would be a cold eternity away from God.
I feel like there that idea of that God is kind of difficult to wrap my head around, right? Because if you created beings that you knew were going to be at fault constantly, and they didn't have like the type of mindset that would remove them from sin, then why would you create a form of punishment knowing that that's what was going to lead them to that punishment? Their faulty minds was going to lead them to that punishment.
That makes me
And
wonder if hell is even bad. I mean, that's like the idea of a lot of people have, like hell being wrong. It's not like everything you just said, Flavio. It's just like your questions, like okay, because it makes sense. What you're saying is making sense.
yeah, that's why I've never been able to like kind of go on. I think that's why I did end up eventually becoming resented towards not yeah, no, yeah, towards religion and the idea that religion would put out of a God. So I was always resented towards that idea of a God because it never made sense to me. And I feel like nowadays I've kind of understood God differently, and that's why my relationship with God has kind of changed. But I've always kind of wanted to hear from like a Christian point of view, like how they interpret that part.
Wait. Hold on. Before you answer that, there's a question from a previous topic that you were talking about. Yeah, the question still stands. Um, regardless of the writings, right, and how you were talking about, oh, the reason why we are not like closest to God is because we are not perfect and God is perfection, right? But you see down here in the earth, like once you decide to practice Christianity, um, after you do like because correct me if I'm wrong, but the process of like everything that Lewis was saying about perfection is like a first communion and a confirmation, no? Like the way that you just like accept God into your life and like that's how you become one with God.
Yeah, so Catholicism itself is very, very traditional in its doctrine. Basically, like they genuinely believe that every time the you are taking the bread and the wine, that you are generally drinking from Jesus' blood and generally eating of Jesus' body, which to me is quite asinine, right? Because I think it's very much symbolic. Like you can pray over that piece of bread all you want, but at the end of the day, it's still bread. Really what that points to is it's like a public proclamation, right? If you've noticed, Catholics tend to do their baptisms very, very, very early on in childhood. Perhaps that's a cultural thing, but I've noticed that to be true of a lot of Catholic churches. Whereas in Christian churches, it's very rare that you'll see very young kids being admitted to. And when I say Christian churches, I mean like the non-denominational or the evangelical or the Protestant type churches, right? Those churches tend to do baptisms a lot later in life. The reason being is that baptism is the removal of the original sin, right? The sin that was brought about by Adam and Eve. And so in order to remove ourselves from that sin, baptism is necessary, and it's also a public proclamation of your faith. That's really all it is. Now, does that itself guarantee that you're going to go to heaven? Well, no, because it also doesn't guarantee that you generally believe in God. I can tell you when I first did my first communion and my confirmation, I definitely did not believe in God, at least not as firmly as I do now.
Okay, yeah, that answers my question because then and it also doesn't guarantee that you will not sin again. I guess is it like a streak that you're on and you're like, okay, I'm a streak, I'm not gonna sin today. Let's see how long.
Sort of, yeah. It's like compare it to recovery, for example, right? So in recovery, you come to admit that you yourself are flawed, that you have a disease that is overpowering you, and as such, you need to make a change about it, right? In Christianity, it's a very similar way. You come to recognize that you're flawed. You come to recognize that you need God, and as such, you start making changes in your life. However, the pursuit in Christianity isn't of that of perfection. It should be, but we also recognize that we're not perfect and we're never going to be perfect. So our recovery is going to very, very much hammer home the idea that you have to fix all the stuff, even if it takes you to your deathbed. The idea of Christianity is that regardless of where you're at, Christ will still love you and will still forgive you, right? And so that's what a lot of people enjoy about Christianity, is that it's, despite all the controversy, it is very, very forgiving, right? And that's what a lot of people want. A lot of people want the idea that God forgives me and God loves me.
Right.
But
Yeah.
a lot of Christian churches miss that angle, that just because you claim to be made righteous by Christ doesn't mean that you can continue being a piece of shit, quite frankly. And just because you claim that you stopped drinking doesn't mean that you can continue to be, continue cheating on your wife, for example.
I feel like the point that you brought up was kind of like the thing that made me, I guess, yeah, be less resentful towards the idea of a religious God, and more or less just understand, I guess, Christians. Because I began to like combine like the way that I see recovery, or the way that I've been talked about recovery, as the same way as like a lot of Christians do. Obviously, not all of them understand that path of Christianity as some other Christians, of being able to, of not of understanding that you're going to be walking towards a path of perfection, but you'll never reach it. It's just going to be progression, just like walking towards progression constantly. I feel like that's kind of like what made me understand that it was that in reality it wasn't the mind that I was creating, or the idea that I was creating in my head.
For sure. Yeah, so to answer your question, basically, to put into context what hell means for us, we have to sort of try to see things from God's perspective, which is obviously really hard to do because we're not God. But if we try to understand his will, we can see that, well, God in the Christian perspective has a couple different characteristics. We believe that he is almighty, that he is all-knowing, that he is all-powerful, he's omnipotent, and he's present everywhere, right? However, we also believe that he is the judge and the rightful judge of everything. And as such, because he is a judge, he wants justice. So justice can only be served if there's a clear distinction between right and wrong, if there's a clear distinction between good people and bad people. And I don't really like using that term, but I mean, it's true, right? There's good people and there's bad people, but even good people do bad things and bad people do good things. So there's sort of this duality of mankind that a lot of people bring into question, like, how is that even a thing? But I think that's where we can start to open up the debate between the Calvinistic perspective, and the idea of free will. Calvinist is predetermination, right? The idea of predetermination, that everything was already destined for us, and the idea of free will. So what's your take on that?
My personal take?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, I mean, back then I used to believe that there was, or I mean, I was always confused on that, because I always thought it was kind of like one of those, what are those called? Paradoxes. Yeah, it was like a paradoxical question, because I thought there were never going to be an answer, because I mean, we would never be able to understand that, we would never be able to conceptualize that. And it wasn't until I got that spiritual awakening and I lived through my process that I was able to kind of like almost see things completely differently. And I've now like come to the understanding that it's kind of like a hybrid of the both, where like in reality we do have free will and we get to choose what we do every day, but there is a will set by a higher power that we can also, that we should follow. But it's not like we're going to be constantly pushed towards that will constantly. Like we can easily choose to just do whatever the fuck we want and fuck up our own lives. But at the end of the day, at some point, all we have to do is just kind of like walk towards that
Ah,
path. That's how I see it, at least.
yes. Yeah, yeah. And I feel like this is the perfect moment to point this out. The way that I see heaven and hell is like right now. It's like today. And if you think about it, a lot of alcoholics and a lot of drug addicts and emotionally sick people have come to understand it the same way, believe it or not, because a lot of them say just for today, right? And when you think about just for today means that you don't know if you're going to be alive within the next hour. And this is how a lot of them keep their sobriety. And the same way, I apply this to heaven and hell. Because I don't know about the past. I've only lived for 19 years. I don't know if half of this shit is true. I mean, I enjoy discussing it and talking about it, but I don't know if half of this shit is true, right? And I don't know if like 500 years from now, this whole end of the world thing is gonna happen, or like God is gonna come down and he's gonna judge, and then he's gonna send people to hell or heaven or whatnot, right? But what I do know is that I am here right now, and what I do know is that I can make a living heaven or a living earth. I mean, earth, a living hell. I'm sorry, out of my life, right? And that I feel like that's exactly where Just for Today comes in. And like I said, it kind of goes by the hand of what Flav was saying, because it's like free will. I guess the way that I see that is like one of the most beautiful gifts that God has given you, right? Free will and the ability to do whatever the fuck you want with your life. So, I mean, I guess if you want to, you're going to have to see it this way. If you want to grow up and be a pedophile, you're gonna be a pedophile. If you want to grow up and fuck animals, you're gonna fuck animals. And I'm not saying you do this willingly. I'm not saying like you're an 8-year-old dreaming and fantasizing about fucking a dog when you were older. That's not what I'm saying. There's obviously things that happen, along the way that make you do those types of things. But what I'm saying is that, like, at the end of the day, it's like you have the will to do whatever you want with your life, And so, yes, he exists. Yes, he's a father. Yes, he's loving and caring and perfect and the Almighty, and he will be forever and ever. However, he will not force you to follow him. He will not force you to do things the way that he wants you to do them, or, for example, the way that the Bible shows, right? Because it also applies to like your daily life. I guess a lot of bad things happen, and I guess this brings up a question: why does God allow evil, right? And the answer is very simple. I literally just explained it. Free will. Instead of seeing it as a right or a wrong, you should see it as a cause and effect, right? Instead of seeing it as like the yin and the yang, you should see it as like something happened, and then there's a result to that. There's a consequence to that, right? And so therefore, when God doesn't exist in mankind, or inside of you, if you're not somebody who follows God, if you're not a man who walks with God, the consequence, the result of that is evil, right? And what do I mean by evil? It's like a lot of things, a lot of a series like of unfortunate events begin to happen in your life, and hell, you guys know a lot of people that have gone through it. A lot of them have gone through, alcoholism, and a lot of them have fallen in drug overdose, and a lot of them like hit their children. A lot of them beat the living shit out of their children. A lot of them kill themselves, and so that's the thing. That's what I mean. Those are consequences of you not following God. It's the same way with the whole idea of why God allows this to happen. He doesn't allow it to happen. You chose not to follow God. Therefore, there will be consequences. The reason why I like this so much is because it also goes by the hand with a lot of the things that I have come to learn in AV and self-help group. And everything that you do will have a consequence. Every single one of your actions will have a consequence. Therefore, shit, you're just gonna have to live with it. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think so. The idea of free will and of predetermination, like, it's just, for one, I don't like the idea of predetermination. That's why I'm going to try to make a case against it, right? I don't like the idea that everything that I do doesn't have a purpose, because ultimately that's what it would mean if it was predetermination. None of what you do has a purpose because it's already doing something else. And so my pride tells me, no, that can't be it, because what I'm doing has to be important. Now, obviously, I have to give some leeway, because obviously what I'm doing is not for the fulfillment of myself, or at least it shouldn't be, but rather for the fulfillment and the greater purpose of God and His glory. The idea behind that is free will basically allows you to fuck up. It allows you to do right things. It allows you to do whatever you need to do that you find necessary, that you find fruitful. And that's going to be different for everybody. I believe that's important because, well, God is a father. And like any good father, he's going to let his children fuck up if he realizes that it's more important for his children to face the pain and face the consequences of their actions as opposed to just sheltering them. I think God is loving, and he loves his children so much that he allows them to endure pain, even if that means having to endure hell, right? And so I think the idea behind people saying that there is hell on earth, like literal hell on earth, is because a lot of people feel separation from God on earth. I think that's where the idea comes from, that once you're separated from God, you're in hell, and a lot of people feel that separation here. There's actually, to quote Psalm 22, the first words of Psalm 22 say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And the funny thing about that is that was written by King David, right? This is the same David that's in the story of David versus Goliath. And remember, King David, God appointed him king. God wanted him to be king. King Saul at the time wanted David killed, and yet David rose to the kingdom. Now, keep in mind, David was not a great person by any means. Like, he did a lot of good shit, but at the same time, he was a pretty fucked up individual. Like, y'all have heard it in chains before. Psalm 51. Psalm 51 actually has a very interesting backstory to this. So, when Psalm 51 is a prayer of repentance, right? And like most other Psalms, it was written by King David. The reason David wrote this is because at the time, David had seen a woman by the name of Bathsheba. She was taking a shower on top of one of the buildings, and he could see her. And he was like lusting after this woman because she was naked and showering, of course, and he found her to be beautiful. So he called his guards. He's like, "Get me that woman." And because he's king, he can do basically whatever the fuck he wants. And he ended up going and having intercourse with that woman. And after fucking her, he basically said, like, well, we can't allow anyone else to know this. But here's the problem. Bathsheba was pregnant. And so he's like, oh, fuck, people are going to realize. And the funny thing is, Bathsheba's husband was very, very loyal to King David, right?
Oh,
and so
fuck.
here's the even most fucked up part. That Bathsheba's husband was in war at the time.
God,
like, he was out in the battlefield.
Oh my God.
In the military, it's very common to hear your higher ups say, "Oh yeah, your girl's getting fucked by Jody right now." And so there's this constant fear that your girl is gonna get fucked by some other dude while you're out in deployment or you're out in war or whatever. And so it was literally happening to this man, right? Like, this man's wife was getting fucked by the king that sent him out to war. And when he realized that he had gotten her pregnant, what he chose to do instead was send him out to the front lines of war, because at first he gave him an out. He said, "Look, come back, take care of your wife." He wanted him to fuck his wife, so that way they thought that the child was his. But he didn't want to do that because he's so loyal. He was like, "No, I have to stay out here and I have to fight with the men. I have to fight for you." So he's like, "All right, motherfucker, go to the front lines," and he got fucking killed.
Damn.
Yeah, and so obviously when all that happened, David came to realize like how messed up all that was. And so that's where Psalm 51 came in, is his prayer of repentance. Like, when he says, "Wash me so I can be whiter than snow," he means he feels like a fucking pig. He feels dirty inside. But no matter how many times you take a shower, you can't wash away that shame and that guilt. Like, that's the idea behind that prayer of repentance. So all of this is to say that like, the separation that you feel from God is very much real, and it's seen all over the Bible, and it's seen all over in our daily lives. So this idea of free will allows us to fuck up, because God knows if you are going to feel separation from me, it's going to be because you separated yourself from me, not because I separated myself from you.
And you willingly will come back to me if you want to. Oh, interesting. I can't get over the fact of you, like, the way that you said that. I want that woman. That reminded me of this one TikTok. You ever seen those TikToks where it's like some random video that's like, like those types of videos that you see, and instantly you're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of some type of, it reminds you of something sexual, right? So it's one of those videos, and there's this TikToker on TikTok, and he's like, he grabs a clip of the video, right, and he puts it in his own, and then it's like that one guy with the glasses, and then all you hear is like, "Sir!" And for example, it's like that one fish, like where you put peanut butter on your toe, and then you give it to the fish, and then the fish starts sucking your toe, and then the comes out, and
Bro, you did not.
"Sir!" and he's like, and then he's like, "Get me that fish! Get me that fish!" It just, I don't know if you ever seen it, but I don't know.
I can't say that I have,
You
bro.
have to leave this part, by the way. You cannot edit this out. This stays in.
Anyways, no. That's very interesting. It's very interesting how you explain that, because then it's like, yeah, I'm giving you the free will to do whatever you want with your life, right? And I love you so much that I'm gonna allow this to happen, and you know, you also have the freedom to come back to me whenever you want, willingly. And I just think that's beautiful. That's beautiful because a lot of people look at religion as something like that's like you're obligated to believe in. Like you're obligated to believe in a God that is the Punisher. The God is that like controls everything. The God that allows for all of these whatever has gone, you know, in your life, whatever happened in your life that was negative, and I mean, that's besides the fact that like us human beings, we tend to victimize ourselves and like point fingers at everybody else and say, oh, it's everybody else's fault. That's easy to do. However, what I'm trying to say is that like willingly, you out of like just the thought of it being genuine, the thought of you genuinely wanting and needing of God, that's beautiful. That's perfect. That's mwah.
You see, the crazy part is that technically speaking, we've only come to this like I guess this understanding because we've lived a spiritual awakening. I feel like it's hard for people who have not lived a spiritual awakening to really like fucking grasp this idea. Because I remember before I even like lived my process, I always like had like literal manic episodes just like trying to understand that part of like what the fuck is it called? Predestiny and free will. Just because it was like how Lewis said, it was like everything that I'm doing is basically stupid then because it's pointless because there's something out there that is either already deciding everything that I'm doing. So there's really just like no hope. My life is already written out. I'm basically living out a movie. So I'm even if I think I'm doing something creative, even if I think I'm doing something good in my life, it's all already been written down in a book. And so what I'm going with this is that even though we're talking about this, technically speaking, even if someone out there who has not lived a spiritual awakening or doesn't really understand it the way that we understand it, they can easily just go with the idea that I mean, at the end of the day, we don't even know if predestiny really is true or if there is a hybrid between the two or if free will does exist. In
Yeah.
reality, it ends up becoming a paradox because there is no proof technically speaking if someone doesn't believe in a god.
What you said is definitely true. Like a spiritual awakening definitely does help you come to realize a lot more of these aspects. So let's talk a little bit more about that then. Like what is a spiritual awakening in your eyes?
I kind of see it as like a defense mechanism where like I kind of lived uh I hit rock bottom, I guess. Yeah, I hit rock bottom. I hit rock bottom and it my life was like when I thought it was like at the worst. And so I kind of see it as kind of like a defense mechanism. Obviously, I don't really see it that way, but if I wanted to put it in like a non-spiritual awoken words, it's kind of just like I created a defense mechanism in my head where everything just fucking changed and I saw things completely different and I saw things that I never saw before. I understood things that I didn't understand before and I was kind of connecting the dots on different things. And that when I lived my spiritual awakening, everything made sense. Like literally everything made sense. Everything that I was doing, what I needed to do next, and even like for the first time that I read the Bible, after I experienced a spiritual awakening, that's when I understood that part of like the Bible is a lot of the times just very like but it just like talks in parables where like everything is basically symbolic, like you don't have to take everything literally. And that's how I've interpreted a spiritual awakening.
See, and even then, even after everything that you explained, I feel like there's still people who will not understand because you clearly said you're like, okay, so I began to understand things that I was not able to understand before, and I started to see things differently, right? But then you also said that you hit rock bottom, and so a lot of these people, one, not only have they not hit rock bottom, but two, yes, they don't understand why they do the things that they do, but they've never even questioned it. For example, like, why do I masturbate? Why do I smoke weed? Why do I drink? I'm pretty sure a lot of people have thought about it. But uh, I'm also sure that you probably haven't done much about it either. You know, and that just makes me wonder because I remember when I first arrived to AV. I remember I used to look up like recovery memes, and so there was a bunch of recovery memes about how like a spiritual awakening was something horrible, and it was something negative, and it was something like that you wouldn't want to experience because you began to see why you did the things that you did, and at some point you see the negative side, like the dark side of your life, and why you do them, and then that's when you begin to feel things like guilt and shame and anger, and embarrassment, and sometimes, and there's no going back. This is the fucked up part. There's no going back from it, bro. It's not like you could just reset your head and be like, I'm gonna just forget about this from here until tomorrow. It's like you're stuck with that, bro. So
It's like learning to unread.
yes, exactly. I've always seen recovery as something positive, regardless of like my dark side, because I have come to see like my shadow, I guess you could call it, my dark side, and the things that I've done and the ways that I have hurt other people. But I've always seen recovery as something very very positive. But anyways, I'm kind of getting off track. I want to get back to the point. I want to get back to the topic that we were talking about earlier.
So, I mean, in regards to spiritual awakening, right? One of the things that at least Alcoholics Anonymous talks about in the 12th step. So, the way that AV talks about it is, as soon as you go through your 4th and 5th step, you achieve a spiritual awakening, which could be true. But 12th step says that it really can happen at any point. It says, as a result of having practiced these steps, we achieve a spiritual awakening, right? And what it says is it's a way of thinking, feeling, and acting in a way that's different than you were previously able to by your own accords or by your own means. What that entails is that in order to achieve a spiritual awakening, you need to get in contact with something deeper than just yourself. And this is where I actually think that Michael A. Singer's opinion on this makes a lot more sense. Bringing Michael A. Singer's opinion into context, it basically shows that the spiritual angle of things, like when people talk about a spiritual essence of Alcoholics Anonymous, what I really think they mean is the conscience, right? The conscience is the most important part because the conscience is what wakes you up to the reality that you are living the way that you are living. But the conscience is what quite literally separates you from the false reality that you've built in your own head. That's what Michael A. Singer talks about. Is it's sort of like when you're in a movie theater and you sort of just get lost into the movie, right? You forget the fact that you're in a theater. If you're conscious, then you're aware of everything. You're aware that your hands aren't you because you can observe them. You're aware that your feelings aren't you because you can feel them and you can observe them. You can observe your thoughts. And as such, these things don't define you as a person. They're just things that you have come to walk with, you have come to be a part of. But the consciousness is akin to that, what would be like, it's sort of like when people talk about the soul, I think that's what they're talking about. It's the essence of a person. That consciousness is the objective view of everything else in the world. And that's what a spiritual awakening is an objective view of things, being able to see things in a way that's different than you were previously able to.
Yeah, it's just fucking crazy, dude.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest reasons too is because, like, well, at least a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, when they, or not even in Alcoholics Anonymous, but at least in AV, when they first live their experience, they come and they say, oh, I'm not religious, I am just very spiritual. And it's like, those things are not alike. Those things are not the same. Like, they're not comparable. Right? Spirituality is very, very different from religion. You do not need religion at all to practice spirituality. Just ask Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a very, very devout atheist, right? And someone whose work I thoroughly enjoy. I really enjoy reading his books, and I really enjoy listening to his podcasts. And Sam Harris goes on record saying that spirituality can be experienced outside of the realm of religion. One of the ways that he likes to experience it is through shrooms, funnily enough. That's why I said I think John was definitely on some shit, right? But I mean, like psychedelics and other type of hallucinogenic drugs, they elicit this out-of-body experience. There is this idea that this out-of-body experience is actually trying to tell you something more than what you already know. It's actually allowing you to be in contact with your conscience.
But now, is that actual spiritual like being? Because that's what they say it as. I've heard of like those topics. I've always enjoyed that topic of like spirituality and psychedelics. But I've kind of like questioned myself, like, are those actual spiritual beings, like something outside of us, some like fucking god, some deity? Because they always call it that, like the machine elves and like these like geometric shapes that they see. Are those outside of our body, or is that just like the Carl Jung the interpretation of our conscious speaking to us or our subconscious speaking to us? What do you guys think?
Hmm.
So I don't know. I definitely think that
See, now I got to think about that one. Now go ahead. I
I
got to think
definitely
about
think
that one.
that either way you look at it, there is a meaning that helps it fit into context. So if you think that these are all just concepts brought up by your psyche, it still makes sense because it's still a connection to your own conscience. To go beyond means to go beyond yourself. It's to be the reason a lot of people relate spirituality to being in one with nature, or like those fucking hippies that are like smoking weed 24/7, or like, bro, it's the Illuminati, man, shit like that,
Goddamn
right?
tree huggers.
Exactly.
What are you trying to say?
What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is like that type of spirituality, the connection with nature, the connection with the being one with the outside world, is it's an essence of waking up, right? Like that's what Sam Harris calls his podcast waking up. It's waking up to this reality, going outside of yourself. Spirituality is induced by something other than yourself. I mean, even in a spiritual awakening, like even in AV, in my experience, there's a very big reason as to why people say there's something in this coffee. It's because a lot of these experiences are out of body and they're just not rational, that you can't explain them. But at the same time, if you try to look at it from a scientific angle, what happens a lot of time when you're writing a fourth and fifth step? You're very fucking tired,
Yes.
right? What happens when you're tired? You start to hallucinate. So it's very, very possible that a lot of these things that you see are just hallucinations. It's very possible that a lot of what you experience in a spiritual awakening or in an experience or in a fourth and fifth step is your mind playing tricks on you because of its nature of making a defense mechanism. It's trying to rationalize these concepts, these inner concepts that you otherwise don't know how to explain. And so in order to explain it to you, it's painting a picture outside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's just fucking crazy. I've always thought about that. Cause I mean that's why
Yeah,
they
they're
kind of
like,
like make you sleepy. That's why they let you fucking.
it's like you're off the shits, but you're not off the shits. You know?
Exactly, bro. Exactly.
It's the coffee.
So that does make you a drug addict. That does make you a fucking drug addict, Lewis.
What, the coffee?
No, nigga, the spiritual awakening.
Look, man, the only difference
See-
between me and a drug addict is the fact that I don't take drugs.
See,
What if
yeah,
it's a drug
dude,
addict?
that's crazy. Look, I just wanted to bring this up because I was talking to this guy. What was it? Last Friday night, I was talking to this guy. I was at group, and he's a, but I really look up to him, and he was talking to me about how like the definition of spirituality is just it's just truth. And what does the truth mean? The truth means that I know the right and the wrong. I know the ups and the downs. I know the pros and the cons. You know, I just know who I am. And it's kind of like you were saying. I know, like, the soul. I got to know my soul. I got to know who I truly am.
Is a simplistic view on such a complex idea limiting one person? Would it limit a person?
Wait, say that again?
Would a simplistic view on a complex idea, which is our existence and our growth in general, limit a person?
The idea of being able to encapsulate all of the entirety of the knowledge that we have possible access to is just, in order to fit it into this one precise explanation, just isn't possible. I think that's what a lot of people come into frustration with. It's like when you're talking with a Christian, most of the time, if you ask them for very, very deep answers, they're just going to tell you, oh, it's because God wants it that way. And it's like, okay, that's true, but do you know why? And that's the biggest question, is a lot of people don't know how to answer the why in the religious sense, because there's no real explanation for it, at least none that makes sense to us. I think the simplistic view of these complex ideas is just a way for us to be able to make sense of it all. The idea behind spirituality is just being able to try to understand things that are outside of our understanding. I mean, that's where we come to ignorance, right? Anyone who doesn't live a fourth and fifth step, like, they're ignorant to their disease, they're ignorant to their defects, they're ignorant to this idea that they are sick and that they need help. And so you can't really blame an ignorant person because they just don't know. That's what Abraham's talking about, is like, when you wake up to this idea, then you don't have a choice anymore. It's like, you can't just undo it. You can't just unsee it.
I think to go to that point, because I was gonna say this. I feel like it is possible to to run away from that idea, or not that idea, from that understanding, from your consciousness. Yeah, I think it is possible. Not in the way that most people might think of it as. Like, you can't just remove your consciousness, but you could definitely numb it and just like fucking repress it. Just like hide it in your deepest like caverns and just kind of like ignore that little voice. At the end of the day, you're not ignoring it, but you're not doing what it's telling you to do. And in some way, shape, or form, you're just kind of like fucking keeping it in the back burner. And I think that's where the 10th step comes in, where if you're not constantly watching your behavior and your thoughts and your actions, then you will stop right there, and you will stop growing in general. Maybe you'll make like a little bit of progress, but you won't make the progress that you're actually able to make. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, I mean, some of the AA personal stories in the big book, in the blue book, however you want to call it, a lot of them do show people going to Alcoholics Anonymous, seeing progress, and immediately falling back for like, and not for just a short period. They fall back for years and years and years, continuing that relapse, basically believing that they're still fine until eventually they come to hit rock bottom again. Rock bottom is when the consequences of your action far outweigh your desire to drink or your desire to continue to involve yourself in your addiction.
It's a badass meaning. I don't think I've ever had a definition for it. I just kind of had like an idea in my head that I've never put into words.
Of what, rock bottom?
Yeah, that's a pretty badass definition. Sex, right or wrong? Wrong.
See, okay.
So,
why are you still a virgin?
Go ahead. Why am I still a virgin? All right. So, as the story goes, I am still a virgin because
you see what happened was
between...
Sorry.
Yeah, as the story goes, right? Sex is a covenant between man and woman and God. As such, sex is the unification of two becoming one. And I mean, that's a little redundant. Sex is the unification of two people, right? As such, involving myself in sex, because think about it this way, like, just think about it logically. Sex is the closest that you can possibly get to a person, because you are going literally negative inches in closer proximity, right? Like, you are not inches away from that person anymore. You are at negative inches at that point. Like, you are inside that person. There's no getting closer than that. And so, as such,
he said so.
I mean, exactly. So, I mean, like, the more you explore your sex,
can't she go inside of you?
If you're really into eating out and fisting and shit like that, I guess you can get a little bit closer.
Shit on the internet, man. I've seen some crazy
What do you think God thinks about fisting, bro?
Cheers.
What I think God thinks about fisting? I think God thinks it probably a little weird, bro. It's probably a little sus. But I mean, if you want to do it, go ahead. I mean, like, I don't think there's anything that says
okay,
no
and
fisting.
that brings this my question up. Okay, what if I told you that God gave you the ability to have sex as a gift for you to express love?
But technically, right there, He also gave him the ability to murder people.
To murder people.
To murder people. He also gave him the ability to murder people in the acts of having fun,
Huh?
but he decides not to do it.
Huh? Huh? What? What do you
I
mean
don't think I'm
fun?
track.
I'm going against your point. Your point
No, no, no. Yeah,
technically
yeah.
doesn't make sense because it can be argued against in that sense that in the same sense that he was given the ability to have sex, he was also given the ability to have a love or not have love, but kill somebody.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It's like
Is
he
that not
was
your
saying.
point? What was your
Yeah,
point?
yeah, yeah.
Actually, what was your point? Maybe I
Oh my
misunderstood you.
God. I'm saying, like, what if I told you that God gave you the ability to have sex and gave you sex as a gift for you to be able to express your love to your significant other, or to somebody,
Oh yeah, never
instead
mind.
of looking at it as like something that over the years society has had a very big influence on you, and has made a really big impact on you, and has made you believe. It's like saying, it's what I'm trying to say. It's like, what if I told you it wasn't God's fault, the way that you think or what you think about sex now? What if I told you that God gave you that as a gift?
I'm eating gummy worms. I'm eating gummy worms. 1 second.
You bastard. Dodging the question.
I ain't dodging no question, bro. I'm a virgin by choice, I
Shit,
swear.
I'm dodging these hoes. That's what I'm dodging. That's why I'm still a virgin.
Exactly, bro. Nah, but I hear you, and I definitely agree. I think God does give the gift of sex to be enjoyed with a partner. However, I don't think sex can be enjoyed with anybody. I think, well, first and foremost, the idea of virginity is very much a social construct. Virginity in the biological sense doesn't really exist because it doesn't really matter,
No, it
especially
does.
for males.
Oh, well,
The
yeah, for males, no.
Yes,
For
the breaking of the
females, yes.
hymen, is a very, very, how can I put it? It's not a very significant act at all. Most people, like most girls nowadays, if they're roughhousing early in their childhood, can break their hymen just by riding a bike, for example, right? And so, like, this idea is very much a social construct. Virginity matters a lot more to us who have built this idea around it, as opposed to in a biological sense. In a biological sense, there's not a big difference between someone who's a virgin and someone who isn't. But even then, like, I mean, the idea of monogamy as a whole is also very, very modern. I mean, Christopher Ryan's book, Sex at Dawn, talks about how we are actually programmed to pursue this desire of sex. I don't think humans instinctively want reproduction just because, like, oh, I really want to have a kid. I don't think people look at other kids and like, I want that. Maybe a couple, but I don't think that's what drove the human race. I think what drove the human race is just that, look, my dick's hard and I want to stick it in something, right? And as such, it just so happens that sticking your dick into a hole makes a baby pop out. Who would know, right? But not every hole is built the same because.
But that goes contrary to the reproduction and the way that God would want things to happen.
Contrary to what?
That goes contrary to the idea of reproduction, and yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
if I'm understanding this right, it definitely goes against like a lot of the Christian beliefs that you may have.
Right.
So,
I don't ascribe to the
but
belief that.
okay. You're taking the scientific like path right now. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Wait.
Yeah. So look, even as a Christian, I don't ascribe to belief that monogamy and having sex with one partner is actually the way that it's been for a long time, because just looking at it, it wasn't. Even in the times that the Gospels were written, in the times of Rome, homosexual practices were very, very commonplace. The way that the sexual hierarchy was laid out was a lot different. For example, in Rome especially, a sexual hierarchy, like if you were penetrating women, like, okay, like you have a sex life. Now, if you're having sexual intercourse with men, that's a little different, because like if you're, put it this way, if you're sticking it into another man, you are seen as very, very dominant. Now, if you're taking it up the ass, now you are seen as much, much lower. So you can see how the sexual hierarchy sort of starts to play out. But what's even more fucked is the people who are at the very, very top are the people who penetrated the mouths of little boys, right? Like little boys. And this was seen as like a huge assertion of dominance. I remember hearing this in a podcast. I don't remember exactly the name of the podcast. I think it was. I think it was talking about. I don't know. They were talking about lexicana at the time. I don't really remember. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these practices were commonplace. So it shows that even in the times that Jesus was alive, people didn't really practice monogamy as much. Like sexual perversion was very, very commonplace. And in order for it to be that commonplace, it must indicate that it's a very, very natural thing to do. So we call it perversion, but is it really perversion if it's our desires?
Do you believe that Jesus actually walked on earth?
Yeah.
Like he was actually physically here?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's the historical accounts of Jesus being a real person. Like, no scientist is going to deny, at least no prominent scientist is going to deny, or historian for that matter, is going to deny that Jesus was a real person and had a real following.
But now
However,
the Jesus, I mean, like the Jesus in the Bible, like he was brought in by God, and he was brought in to be like the savior of Earth
see
or
that
of the
that I feel
humans.
like we don't know, but it's like saying, let's say 500 years from now, 3,000 years from now, there's a book written about a guy named Flavio, right? And so we know that Flavio existed, and the book says that Flavio has a huge cock. However, we don't know if Flavio has a huge cock. We just know he existed, but we never saw his huge cock, so we don't know if he has a huge cock. I feel like that's kind of it.
What about you, Lewis?
I think Jesus had a huge cock.
Okay, dude. Okay, dude. But do you think he was brought here to save, like, he was brought here by God to save humans and to sacrifice himself
I
and
do. Yeah,
cleanse everybody's sins?
I think the idea of the Trinity is. I actually don't think that part specifically is metaphorical. It may be, and it may be symbolic, but at the end of the day, I do believe that God has. It's not that he's three different people. I think it's that he plays three different roles, and he plays them on purpose. Right. The role of the Father is to create. The role of the Son is to make righteous, to sanctify, and the role of the Holy Spirit is to build within the individual the desire to continue to follow the Lord. I think when people reach a spiritual awakening, the Christian version of that is having the Holy Spirit within you, because now you have that voice that tells you, do this, do that, instead of the voice that tells you, oh, fall into your sin, fall into your temptation, continue to follow your defects. One of the questions I get most commonly is, how are you a Christian but still believe in evolution, right? And I think to deny evolution would be asinine, right? So, all right, I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate for both sides. The Christian angle, the scientific Christian angle, if you believe there exists one, is that there is no species that directly links humans to apes. And in a way, that is true, right? There is no like hybrid. There's no official crossover. We've never really seen evolution happen. We just saw it on the Galapagos Islands on a small scale. At least Charles Darwin saw it on a small scale, and believes that if over time these little mutations, these little genetic mutations happen, then it will eventually lead to these larger effects, right? But that's just a theory. Like, we can't confirm that it's true. It's a theory that is very, very heavily backed up, and one that I personally believe. But the way the Christian angle paints it is the first the first ape to walk on two legs, the first bipedal mammal, the first bipedal categorization of a monkey or an ape, they called her Lucy, and her scientific term is Australopithecus afarensis, right? And so the Australopithecus afarensis then continued to go through these genetic mutations to evolve to, Homo erectus, and eventually Homo sapiens, and eventually what we are now, Homo sapiens sapien. Now, here's the thing. Australopithecus afarensis has been reclassed meaning that like it doesn't belong in a species of its own. It's just it belongs to either apes or to humans. Like there's no actual direct link that we can see in regards to a categorization of species. However, we can still see that the genetic makeup between both is so similar that you cannot deny the differences. And the question then becomes, well, if the 7 days of creation are true because we believe the Bible is true, then where does it fit? Like, how can you as a Christian claim that evolution is true? Well, here's the thing. God said, let there be light on the first day, and there was light, right? Light was good, and God divided the lights from the darkness. God called the light day, called the darkness night. Now, first off, what I actually believe that means is, at least day one, I think is talking about the Big Bang, talking about when it happened, and saying the sun was already there. Now, light was able to shine on this new earth. When the Big Bang occurred and the collision occurred, and this new mass started to form with its own gravitational pull, this allowed light to shine on the earth. And as the earth started to make its rotation, because again, it has its own gravitational pull at this point, now all sides of the earth are starting to get covered. It takes 24 hours, but within those 24 hours, you have the first day and the first night. I think that's what day one is talking about. When day two describes firmament, like we can see that the earth didn't just happen, right? The atmosphere started to form over time and started to build over time. We can see in day three, the earth is seeing the vegetation. Like there was plenty of microbial beings in the earth, like in the earth, in the ground, but those obviously took time to evolve. I believe that between day 3 and day 4 and day 5, there was millions and millions and millions of years of evolution that had to occur, right? Because day 4, the sun, the moon, and the stars, right? Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven. Like these things had to already happen, but the astronomical description of things didn't really fit the way that we understand them now. Like if you were to look at the sky millions of years ago, it would look slightly different to what we understand now because, well, as the atmosphere starts to build and starts to thicken, we see less and less of those stars. We see less and less of the astronomical, of the celestial bodies, right? And day 5, once we see the birds and the sea creatures, we can see that these are other species that are starting to erupt, that are starting to bloom in these new environments that are being created. As the earth starts to separate the land, as the land starts to get fertilized, we can see all these different things happening. Right? And eventually, when we have land animals and humans, I think that's when evolution happens. Or like this, that's when like the pinnacle of evolution happens. And I say pinnacle meaning like where we started to come into play. But obviously that had to take millions and millions and millions of years in order for that to happen.
I do want to say something about what Lewis said, because I mean I kind of mentioned that in the beginning, and I really like how you phrased everything. Like you literally, but you put evidence into everything, and I would agree with that. And that goes back to like what I was saying before with like how the Bible is very symbolic, because I mean at the end of the day, I think about it, and if the Bible was phrased in a way where it explained exactly how the world was created and how God created the world, and how it would have to go into depth about, oh, after 4 billion years, that's when we saw the first animal, and 6 million more years the human was born, whatever. That would be really like fucking, I mean, specific. And I think in some way we need people to not believe in the Bible. We need people to have doubts. We need that counter argument towards the belief of something bigger than us. Because, I mean, if we had concrete evidence that God existed, then that would defeat the purpose of anything religious, or of anything of any path towards a higher power, the higher power's will. Because I mean, I feel like, I mean, if everybody had concrete evidence of it, we would all just be religious. We would all just believe in a God. We would all just be like followers. But it wouldn't be because we experience things. It was just because we know that God exists. And I feel like in some way, shape, or form, we, by us not understanding that God, or I mean for me specifically, because I didn't believe in a God in the beginning, or I believed in a God in the beginning as a kid, but after a while I became resented towards him and I didn't believe in him anymore. But now that I've lived what I've lived, I've experienced what I've experienced, and I felt what I felt, I have a different understanding of what God is. And I don't follow God just because I know He exists. I follow God. Well, I mean, kinda, yeah. I guess I follow Him more just because of the experiences that I've had and the relationship that I had, and how back then I believed that God was a certain way, and He changed my way of viewing Him. He changed the way that I understood Him, and I feel like in some way those counter arguments towards God, the atheists, are necessary because, I mean, I wouldn't be able to have the relationship that I have with God right now if it wasn't for that. If it wasn't for my beliefs that I believed that God didn't exist, and I kind of quote unquote had evidence that God didn't exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that reminds me of the dragon in my garage. It's this passage. It's this passage from the Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan, and it's about a guy who invites his friend over, and he tells his friend that he has a dragon in his garage, right? So the friend obviously he's like, okay, well let me see it, and so he takes his friend to the garage. He opens the door, and there's nothing but a ladder and like buckets of paint that are empty and like tools that you would use for your yard and your garden. That typical shit that you have in your garage. And so obviously the friend begins to question, well, where's the fucking dragon? And so the guy tells him, oh, the guy that sees the dragon, the guy that has the dragon in his garage, he's like, oh well, I forgot to tell you that the dragon is invisible. And he's like, oh, okay, well, why don't you use some type of like some sort of glasses, like some sort of X-ray vision, some sort of thermal vision, in order for you to see it, or in order for you to see like it, or like yeah, like notice its presence, right? And then he's like, oh, well, I forgot to tell you, um, it's like he just goes on and on and on about like how you just can't, his friend can't see it, because it even got to a point where the friend's like, okay, well, I get that it's invisible, and I get that like you can't feel it or hear it, okay, but now why don't you try like throwing flour on the ground to try and like figure, or like try and give its footprints a shape and try to see its footprints. He's like, oh well, I forgot to tell you, this dragon doesn't walk, it flies, it only flies, and so he just goes on and on telling him about it. But then if you think about it, it's like, just because his friend doesn't see it doesn't mean it's not true. Like the guy sees it, and I think that, okay, I'm kind of remembering what I was trying to get to earlier. It's like, as long as it works for you, as long as you understand it, and as long as it's helping you in your recovery. And yeah, there we go, that's what I was trying to get to. Like, you'll see the results, you'll see things like your sobriety, you'll see things as like learning how to work with, how to live with, how to manage character defects that we have come to understand that some of them we will be able to manage, some of them we will be able to control, and then there's others that we will be harder than others for us to be able to work on, and things like that. You begin to learn new things about yourself, and like, just overall, it's just the part of like the conscience and the awakening. And let me just point out real quick. Let me just point out the fact that I don't think we actually mentioned this earlier. But by the way, for those of you out there listening to this, I just want to point out that we're talking about something that's real. We're talking about someone that is real. We're
Israel?
talking about um is real. Like like it happened in real life.
Uh,
Like, the three people that are in this podcast right now have seen, heard, or felt the manifestation of God in one way or another. And in any shape, way, in any way, shape, or form, we have seen the manifestation of God in our lives. So it's safe to say, that we are talking about God, and we're not. Yes, we are debating. Yes, we are talking about different issues and events and controversies and social dilemmas that go on. But this is real. God is real. I just want to point out that that's what I'm trying to say. God is real. Okay. Um, and that's it. You know, I don't give a fuck. Okay, I dare say, bro. I dare fucking say. I could care less if you consider yourself an agnostic or an atheist. God exists, bro. God exists. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. I see it this way, See, something that Lewis already mentioned was that God was the creator. God is eternal. He said that God is eternal. He said that God is the Almighty. And he said that God is like on top of everything. And so that means that that's just how it is. God is the Almighty. And so what I was explaining to them earlier, or what I was trying to explain to them earlier is that, like, even if you try to view or oppose my side of the debate with, like, science, it's like, think about it this way. Let's suppose that you say, okay, well, we come from the monkey, right? We come from Lucy, we come from a fucking ape, whatever, or whether you try to say what came first, like the egg or the chicken, or the chicken or the egg. All right. Well, the real question is, where did the fucking ape come from? Okay, and let's suppose that the egg came first. Okay, well, who put the egg there? Let's say the chicken came first. Well, then who made the chicken first? Right? And so it's the same thing if you try to come up with me with the whole Big Bang theory, right? Well, what caused the Big Bang to happen? And you're like, well, oh, a cosmic explosion. Well, what caused a cosmic explosion? Oh, a fucking alien. Because there's aliens now. Okay, well, who or what created the aliens? And it's just, it's nonsense, because you'll go on and on and on and on trying to figure it out. And that's the thing. That, you have to come to the conclusion that there's something that has created everything. And that very, very often is considered God. Now, if you say who created God, you are already assuming, or I'm sorry, you are already insinuating that God was created by something else. Therefore, it's not God anymore. Because once again, going back to what I said at the beginning, God is the Almighty. He's at the top. There's nothing before that. So that's it can't be God. If you the moment you begin to question who created God, that is no longer God, right? And so I guess that's just the end of the conversation, right? It's just that's the way that you can see that God exists. Now whether God is the way that Catholicism explains it, and the way let's say that Catholicism says that God is Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ has a huge cock, or let's say that Christianity says that God is Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ has a penis the size of Lewis's penis. Well, that's a whole another argument, whether the Islam is true, whether the Jews are right, whether the Christians are right, whether the Buddhists are right. That's a whole another argument. Point is, God exists. You know what I mean? And I think just to wrap up my point here, just to wrap up my argument, I think that's the most interesting part. That at the end of the day, it's like you have that. You have that. Like, you have the opportunity. You have the ability to view God however you want. Because at the end of the day, something you also come to understand in recovery, it's that all recovery really suggests is just a loving God. It doesn't matter how you view it. Hell, you can believe in, a very common metaphor that we often use is like a chair, like the ones that you sit on. You want to believe in a chair, then so be it, right? Um, but that's the thing, as long as it works for you, you got to make sure that it works for you. You got to make sure that it functions. You got to make sure that it's something that um is restoring you to sanity. So long as it does the job for you, it doesn't really matter what you believe in, right? At the end of the day, we can all say that we are theists. So, you know, I just want to put out there that um, a lot of the points that I was throwing at Flav and Lewis, and even for me to argue, or a lot of these things come from what is considered um, what how do you pronounce pantheism? I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, pantheism. And pantheism is just the idea of God being manifested through the universe and nature and things, and so that's the main reason why I began to bring up things like, oh, um, the Bible was written by mankind and not by God, or oh, churches were built by mankind and not God, right? And well, Lewis pointed out that, yeah, I mean, that's because God gave him the ability to do so. So I let that be, right? But at the end of the day, what I was trying to get to with that is like where you see God and how you see God, right? And there's really nothing wrong with you seeing him in a church. That doesn't mean that's not right or wrong. That's just where you see him. If you see him in the Bible, that's just where you see him. It's not right or wrong. If I see him in trees, if I feel him when I get a breeze that hits my face, if I see him in the sky, if I see him in another human being, if I see him in my beautiful German Shepherd Luna every time I come home, then that's where I see him. That doesn't mean that my beautiful German Shepherd Luna is God. That just means that that's a manifestation of God, and that's a gift from God, and that is something that God has given me to enjoy of, like sex, like the argument that we were just having earlier, right? So it's really just that. I just wanted to point out that God is real, and the best part is that you can believe in God however you want to believe in him. Now, you want to watch out. You don't want to lie to yourself, because you are at risk of falling into, the lie that you believe in a God. Because oftentimes when you say, oh, I believe in God, it's like, what I'm trying to get to is like, don't believe in yourself. Okay? You'll notice the difference. You'll notice the difference. But don't lie to yourself saying that you believe in God, but you believe in yourself. Don't lie to yourself and saying, oh, I don't practice any specific religion, but I do believe in God, and God is nature, and God is astrology, and God is this and that, and blah, blah, blah. Remember what I said. I think that this is the best way that you can tell the difference. You got to make sure that it's a loving God, right? And not only that, once you begin to see results in your life, then I'd say you're on a pretty good path into having a relationship with God, because that, going back to recovery, I know that I'm referring a lot back to recovery, um, but that's the thing, that it's very interesting to me, because I came to understand a lot of these things in recovery, I came to have a passion for reading in recovery. I used to hate reading for the wrong reasons. I used to compare reading to school, and school wasn't something that I enjoyed. Um, it wasn't a place I enjoyed going to. Doing homework wasn't something I enjoyed doing, and I always related books to that.
Alright, boys, we've been recording for almost 2 hours, so we should wrap up.
You can wrap it up. You can wrap it up.
So if you did enjoy this podcast, please go ahead, make sure to leave a like button to let us know you liked it. Also, leave a dislike if you didn't like it. No one else will be able to see it, but we'll be able to see it, so at least we'll know what to do better. If you have any suggestions for future podcast topics, go ahead and leave them in the comments, and share this podcast with your friends. Let other people know. Hopefully, as we start getting more and more people on board, we can start introducing guests. We can start introducing different types of topics, and whatever. You know how it goes. Just, you know what to do. You've been on the internet for long enough. Go ahead and fucking do it. Share it.
Most importantly, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Yes. Yes.
Very well.
Ah, splendid. Okay, perfect. I think that should do it.